you so much, Max, Hillary from World Forum Disrupt, for helping us organize this great session. Thank you, Amy and Kimberly, who are joining us from WeTransfer and IBM, for taking the time to share from your extensive knowledge and experience in this very interesting domain of fake traffic and bots and the fake web, as we're calling it these days. I'll just introduce myself real briefly, and if Amy and Kimberly could introduce yourselves as well, and then we'll get started right away. So I'm Daniel. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer at CHEQ. We're a cybersecurity company specializing in what we call go-to-market security, and in protecting go-to-market teams, marketing funnels, sales pipelines from bots and fake users. So this is sort of our domain of expertise. And as Chief Strategy Officer, I also run the marketing operation at CHEQ globally. So I also wear the hat of a marketer who's affected by the fake web, and excited to be on this panel with these great speakers. Amy?
Hey, I'm Amy Sheridan. I work at WeWork. I work at WeTransfer. I'm at WeWork right now. I work at WeTransfer, but I'm also a consultant for many other companies. I came from, I owned my own business for 13 years, sold it about 2.5 years ago, and was at Vicom for 2 years before starting at WeTransfer. This is a very important topic, and one of the reasons I've actually decided to sell my business that I, founded. So I would love to talk about this. I can't wait. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Amy. Kimberly?
I'm Kimberly Rasmussen. I am a lifelong IBMer, and I've had many roles in marketing, supporting sales, technology, etc. I am currently the data privacy leader for global marketing at IBM. But I do have background in web analytics, leading a web analytics team for many years at IBM, as well as quite a few years in paid media and advertising. So this topic is very near and dear to my heart, and I'm excited to talk to everybody about it today. So thank you, Amy, Daniel, and Max and Hillary, for inviting me here to talk about this.
Thank you, Kimberly. Thank you, Amy. And we're going to get started without further ado. And what I'm going to do, and I promise I will not take up more than 2 to 3 minutes of everyone's time here, is just a few slides, I guess, to set the stage of what we're here to discuss today. So you will all bear with me as I share my screen, and I hope that my screen is now visible to all. That's great. So the fake web, as this term that we keep hearing emerging about what's going on today in the internet, and one could argue, this is something we're going to discuss today, that ironically the fake web is real. We're seeing reports of the internet nearing 500 million fake shoppers with the rise of bot activity. Apologies, AirPods are precarious. We're seeing reports of fake followers in influencer marketing. We're seeing reports of campaigns being affected by bots and fake users. We're seeing ad fraud affecting the 2020 elections, which now seem like ancient history. We see reports of huge companies like PayPal, who recently discovered 4.5 million accounts coming from illegitimate sources, which caused a huge stock dive. And we're seeing Black Friday shoppers coming from all sorts of fake sources and causing all sorts of problems on the e-commerce side. So it really is, at this point, everywhere, one could argue. Just from our own data, because CHEQ today, we span around 12,000 customers around the world. So we have a lot of data on this, and I will not drown you in the many data points that we've collected on this, but I'll give one interesting data point, that when customers come in and they plug themselves in, what we realize is that 27% on average of the website traffic coming from direct and organic sources, I'm not even talking about from paid sources, seems to be invalid in some way, shape, or form. And I think one of the things we're going to discuss today, what is invalid traffic, what is fake traffic, what goes into that definition, but it's traffic that obviously is problematic or not real in some way. And I guess the last thing I'd point out, just to set the tone for this discussion, is that what we're noticing is this is not an isolated issue. It's not that bots or fake accounts are impacting a siloed off part of the business, like, let's say, a paid marketing campaign, right? It seems to be everywhere. It seems to, I'm careful to use the word contaminate, but it seems to show up in our data, obviously, and therefore maybe affect decisions. It seems to affect, the conversion efforts on the website. It seems to make requests to our tech stack on the website. It seems to obviously engage with our marketing and paid marketing and our CRM and our CDP and all elements of the go-to-market operation. And I think this is sort of the foundation for our discussion to discover why this is happening, how this is happening, what could be done about it. And that's what we're going to talk about today, the fake web. So I will stop sharing and I will get right into it. And I want to ask our esteemed panel members, first and foremost, before we can even get into this discussion, how are you as an organization and as experts in this field defining fake or invalid traffic? What is invalid? What goes into that? Please take it away. Maybe Kimberly, I can ask you to start.
I'm happy to start. Obviously, we didn't rehearse that part well enough, so we will just get into this here. So definitely, IBM is using a number of different, both internal and external solutions. They range anywhere from, I'm not kidding, a massive spreadsheet of known what we call invalid traffic sources, all the way to partnerships and technologies that have been able to help us to identify these things. We started with it primarily in our programmatic media space, of course, because you're spending actual dollars on fake eyeballs, as we like to say. But quickly have also focused our energies and efforts over the years on our web analytics as well, because we use that to optimize both our web pages and our web experience as well as our campaigns. And so there's real dollars behind the decisions we make associated with both of those things. So definitely we use a combination of like brute force, boots on the ground, as well as, sort of more modern day technologies and partner relationships and technologies to be able to identify invalid traffic.
And if I could follow up on that and ask, in your definition or your organization or IBM's definition of invalid traffic, what goes into that? What would qualify in your mind as invalid traffic?
Well, it's a number of things. It is obviously bots, like activities that don't mimic human behavior well. They're easy to identify in some ways. In other ways, it's actually much harder. We used to call it like non-human traffic. But in some of our discussions, prior to this conversation with this larger group, we've also talked about the fact that, there actually sometimes are malicious humans behind some of this activity. So, we used to call it non-human. We've changed our vernacular over the years to kind of take into account the fact that there's a larger set of definitions, that all of them, which we would categorize as sort of invalid or, intentionally or otherwise distracting or diluting the true information that we're trying to ascertain from our analytics, from our media, et cetera.
So it's super interesting. I want to direct now to Amy the same question, but maybe if I could add a little flavor to it, because I know that you're coming with a very strong performance marketing angle. And, I'm a marketer too. And I know that in performance marketing, everything's about driving efficiency. And we want that traffic that ultimately is going to convert or purchase or whatever your action is. And I'm curious if your definition of what you're looking at as invalid or fake is different in the way that, we've always said at CHEQ that invalid is anything which has neither the ability nor the intent to convert. I'm curious, as a performance marketer, how you're looking at that.
We look at it very similar to what Kimberly said. So there's a couple issues. They're bots, obviously. And it's interesting in the affiliate space and the lead generation space, which I've been in for probably 18 years now. This started pretty early. I feel like they beta tested our industry because it was something new and up and coming, and because there were no fraud products at that moment to, help this situation. I started my business in 2006, and by 2010, the prevalence of fraud, it went from zero fraud, not one bit of fraud. And in 4 years, I was like 10, 15% fraud. And then by the time I sold my business, between the lead generation and the affiliate network that I ran, it was like going towards 25% fraud. And I found that I was wasting, 25, 30% of my time dealing with it. And it really bothered me. In the affiliate space, I would say that there are more humans looking to do something nefarious, or as maybe 50-50. There's as many bots as there are nefarious humans. All things like buying a subscription with a gift card, trying to get through the back ends, the back end servers like that, and the back end Stripes and Shopify's like that. But lead generation is like the perfect breeding ground for fraud. And if the advertisers don't call and try and close these users in real time or somewhere close to that, it gets to be pretty bad. And then at the end of the month, there's tons of chargebacks because they didn't do their due diligence in time, and could really spiral out of control for lots and lots of money, both on the lead generation side and the affiliate side of things. But there is a huge problem in our business that nobody likes to talk about, but I'm glad we're sitting here and discussing this, because we can not talk about it all we want, but it's happening, and it's happening to everyone. There's a few products that have come out, some that have been around for a long time. I've always used Fraud Logic. That's one of my favorite products in the space, but new things and new ways are developing all the time. I was at a trade show last week called LeadsCon, and I snidely said to someone, do you think in the next hotel they're having anti-LeadsCon? Like all the fraudsters get together and they're having their own, okay, we know they're over there and this is how we're going to crack them. It's very interesting. And it was like a real rational thought, because they must be doing something. It must be doing something together, like as a ring, So, yeah.
So first of all, thanks for that answer. And I love that last anecdote of yours of, that picture we're having of the fraud con. I think that's a great segue into our next question. But just to preface that with a thought that I always had in my mind about fraud, that we were saying, why is this so prevalent? Why is this so rife, and why is it on the rise constantly? And one explanation is that there are very few criminal enterprises, if I can call it such, which are on the one hand so lucrative and fairly easy to pull off. Not saying that it's easy, but you could do it with the laptop in the comfort of your home. And yet that the risk of getting caught, even if the fraud itself is prevented, of actually getting caught, prosecuted, indicted, is close to zero. And that this is a very positive, risk reward equation for the perpetrator, unlike drug trafficking, for example, where it may or may not be lucrative, but it's not a happy ending usually for the drug trafficker. So I think that leads me to, the next question, which is, why is this happening? And I just want to, I'm going to direct this one back to Kimberly, but I also want to add a flavor to this question, is that with that last anecdote that I gave about this being a deliberate criminal enterprise, is all invalid traffic and fake traffic, in your mind, a deliberate attempt to defraud someone? Or is the internet so automated, so rife with crawlers and scrapers and VPNs and proxies that only a small part of it is deliberate fraud?
I will answer to the best of my ability. This is a big topic to grapple with. The answer is probably, it is a combination for sure. Even we ourselves, like, we deploy crawlers on our own domains to try to suss out, I'm going to use one example, hard-coded scripts or tags on a page. We need crawlers in order to be able to do that, to understand where those crawlers exist, or I'm sorry, where those hard-coded tags exist, and then, you know, govern and make sure that they're, you know, honoring users' preferences, et cetera. Too many people, you know, at a company like IBM, too many people, I always say this, have the ability and the knowledge to add a script on a page. You know, you just throw a stone, you're going to hit somebody who actually knows how to do that. And they don't actually always know, you know, what it is they're doing. And so we need to employ measures like, you know, crawlers. And so certainly crawlers and certain things like that with the best intentions are not malicious in any way whatsoever. However, they can actually impact what we're talking about here. They can impact your data in a way that is unintended, but yet sometimes unavoidable. And so we definitely consider that one of the more acceptable use cases for why this happens. But we do believe, and we have come to believe, based on our data and our knowledge over the years, that there is plenty of malicious activity as well, especially in the case of something like programmatic and media buying, where there's, you know, just enormous amounts of money being spent based on every eyeball, every click, et cetera. If you can have a bot that, you know, represents itself as a set of eyeballs, or represents itself worse as a click, we are paying enormous amounts of money for that, and somebody's profiting in the middle, right? So that we know to be the case, and what we're trying to do is understand, you know, and again, it's a balance, and it's a constant evolution of learning and understanding, and then action associated with that, what we can do to avoid especially the more nefarious and malicious bots, and again, just invalid traffic, again, beyond just bots, because we know that that's the case. So I don't know if that answers the entire question. We don't always know who benefits. However, I will say this, and this is in one of our prep calls, I did pose this back to Daniel, which is, Daniel, I understand why it happens in programmatic, because there's money to be gained or lost. Why does it happen in other spaces? Can
that
you
is,
help?
yes, that is the, I don't know what it is now, $60, $100 billion question. It's some form of billion-dollar question. I think, and I'm curious on, Amy, on your take on this as well. From our perspective, it is a combination of what you said at the macro level, right? So we're seeing, look, we hear reports. I mean, Imperva says 52% of the internet today is automated, is script, is not people. We have that number at closer to 40%, and I've heard other vendors say 70%, which I think is a bit over the top. But we're talking about a large, sizable portion of the internet today isn't even human traffic, and then we can divide that up into, you know, what of that is intentional, malicious, and what is not. And even in subsections of that. So a crawler, or maybe a scraper is a better example. A scraper can be used by an Expedia.com or a Booking.com to get all that data from the hotel registries and from the airlines. And that's how they do it, and that's legitimate. And like Kimberly says, if that is known to the marketer whose these scrapers are engaging with their website, and they're able to separate the wheat from the chaff, then that's fine, and that shouldn't cause damage, but it can if you don't. And then, of course, there's scrapers which are used for scraping content, scraping data, other malicious forms of attack. So we know that. We know that proxies, it's a neutral thing. It's like saying a knife. You know, I can carve up a steak with a knife, or I can do other bad things with a knife. You know, proxy server. I mean, we have customers who say VPN for me is not a problem at all. And some say, no, I do not want traffic out of geo. I do not sell in this geo. And of course, there are other more sophisticated types of proxies out there. There's a huge click farm economy. I mean, you know, today, if you Google buy clicks on whatever, or buy likes, or buy shares, or buy comments, you will find an almost out, I'd say, out in the open economy of buying all these interactions. Some of it's more sophisticated and automated. A lot of it is humans sitting and doing this, often underpaid in a third world country. So there are so many things, I think, that go into it, and so many different motivations. Some of them are clear and known, like ad fraud in programmatic media. I think we understand by now how that works with the complex ecosystem of ad exchanges and networks, and we can understand the affiliates. And some things it's harder to understand. Why did someone fill out a lead form in my website? Sometimes we don't know. Sometimes we can say, well, it's a one step closer to infiltrating your server. So it could be that, right? I have now more data on your company. It could be a form of spamming attack that is being prepped. And sometimes we just don't know. So I think it's just an endless topic, which we could talk hours about. But a lot of food for thought there. Amy, I'm curious your take in general, and also from a performance marketing stance. Yeah, why is this happening? And maybe more also on the PPC marketing front, not just like the programmatic. You know, what's going on here?
Well, one of the things I wanted to talk about, it's kind of a little bit outside this, is, you know, I have actually seen a room with hundreds of phones. They were doing Spotify fraud, you know, so they were listening to X artists, you know, and had all of the phones on a wall, playing X artists that they got paid whatever X number of dollars for. So I actually saw something face to face like that, because I was just dying to understand, like, how does this work? What does it look like, you know? And it's really as rudimentary as a bunch of phones glued, hundreds of phones glued to a wall, you know, doing whatever the bot wants it to do, whether it's buy sneakers or play an artist Spotify music that they get paid for, or, you know, signing up for lead generation offers for higher education. You know, that was one of my main businesses. And I saw on one of what you just showed earlier, that it's like the top business that attracts fraud. Now, there's a lot of reasons for that. One of the reasons is because generally the call centers are in-house, and, you know, it takes a moment for the schools to call these users back, or prospective students back. They tend not to be the speediest people to do that. And with that lag comes, you know, the end of the month and billing. And by the time they figure it out, it's too late, you know, and they've done like some real damage, you know. With ClickFraud's very interesting. You know, they'll just like, one day I'll look at Google Analytics and I'll be like, Nigeria is going off. You know what I mean? Like, the spike is this unbelievable, but nothing happens from it. Like, no one bought anything, nothing happens, you know, just this incredible spike of traffic in this country or that country, or, you know, it's very, I don't know what the goal is. I don't understand it, but it happens, you know, it happens. And it's like direct traffic to our website. Like, I don't know what they're trying to do, and maybe someone else does. I don't think anyone really knows, but it'll happen. And it's not like it happens, you know, once every year. It's like once a month, like some random country will go off, you know. I don't know if they're looking to get into our system or the back end, but it's tough. It's very interesting. You know, I don't know, see how they can get paid, you know, like, what are you getting paid? You know, I don't know, but, you know, that's, hopefully we figure this out one day. I mean, it honestly makes it such a difficult place. You know, just one of the worst things about our job, frankly. I love what we do. I've been doing it for 23 years. I'll do it for the rest of my working life. But it's probably the biggest bummer of my job is this, you know, and all of our jobs. You you know, we like do everything based so hardcore on data and modeling and all of this nuance that we're making, you know, custom audiences and lookalike audiences and all these assumptions. And like, we all know like one variable is fine, but two variables is when the problems start, and more than two variables is a waste, you know, model wise. So that variable, which always exists, like has to be taken into consideration for everything we do. You know, everything data driven. From the performance marketing side of things, everything is data driven. There's no emotion like anymore, even in creative. So yeah, it's a tough situation.
You know, I have to say, completely unscripted, that Amy, you always seem to set up the next topic with the most perfect segues, because I think what you transition to is talking about the damage and those head scratching moments, and not just head scratching moments, like real, as Kimberly mentioned, you know, real dollars are behind decisions we will make as marketers. And the next topic that we wanted to discuss today is, you know, why are marketing organizations focused on this so much? And just to set the tone for the question, I mean, let's all remember that if we were talking to a marketer, I don't want to say 10 years ago, maybe even 5 or 6 or 7 years ago, or maybe, I don't know, maybe it's been around for long enough, but definitely 10 years ago, we would have been talking to them about bots. They would have been saying to us, go talk to the chief information security officer. It's got nothing to do with me. It's not a marketing or a go-to-market organization problem. And yet today, I'm talking to you two as marketing leaders. I myself am a marketer deeply involved in this, and pretty much every marketing leader I speak to today, this is either central to their strategy, fighting bots, fighting fraud, fighting automated traffic, fighting invalid traffic, or it's becoming central to their strategy. So I guess, what do you think is the reason that this is happening? What are those head scratching moments, pain points? What are the things that are making us become cybersecurity officers? And maybe Amy, we could start with you this time.
Sure. I don't know what has taken these people so long, because we've been getting blasted with this, like I said, for over 10 years. You know, it started in I looked it up before I did this panel, like, when did the problem start? And that was in 2010. You know, I've always had this thought process of like, they're practicing for the big event. I do not know what the big event is, you know. People thought it was going to be the election with Donald Trump. Like, I feel like they use, you know, the affiliate marketing or lead generation space to like hone their skills to then go on and do much larger, much more damaging sets of fraud, you know, or, you know, fraudulent tactics. But I don't know why people are just starting. People didn't want to talk about it. You know, it's like nobody wants to talk about it, you know? And even like in our industry, in my industry, I'm going to be really honest. I mean, there are people that have been at my level, my compatriots, that we've been doing it since the 90s, that accept some of this and don't fight it and pay people knowingly when they've done it. And that's part of the problem. You know what I mean? Like, I've never, if I thought you did fraud, if I could prove you fraud, I will never pay you, ever, you know? But there are people that are making money because, you know, the advertisers haven't figured it out yet, and they just let it ride. And that's part of the issue as well. I mean, two topics. Nobody wants to talk about it. And the people that do know what's going on sometimes let it ride because there's no solution, and because it continues to make them money as a middle person, you know? So, I mean, not a lot of people say what I just said, but it's the truth.
Yeah,
I couldn't agree more with Kim. Sorry. Oh, Kimberly, I was about to hand it to you. So.
Yeah, okay, great. So thank you, Daniel and Amy. So I know there's a lot of questions in the chat and in the Q&A to just talk about like, what are the, you know, what do we all do? And I think the answers from each of the three of us will be different. What do we do to avoid it? As I mentioned early on, we do everything to avoid it at IBM. We do everything from like very much like boots on the ground, brass tacks. I'll use any kind of analogy to say it's people identifying these things. They see, different behaviors. They say this doesn't seem legitimate, and therefore we're going to add it to a list, and we're going to try to apply this list in all that we do. That's the most rudimentary version of it. What we then do is actually leverage a variety of, and I understand there are companies of every size probably on this webinar today, but we leverage, different partnerships through, and again, I'm not advocating for specific companies, but I will say we use, our programmatic media buying platform, as well as companies like Double Verify and DAV and others to do, pre-bid and post-bid kind of, to Amy's point, to ensure we're not paying for the invalid eyeballs in traffic. We do negative keyword targeting. We do all sorts of things to protect our brand, but to protect against fraudulent or invalid traffic in both advertising and on our website, we do use some standard, providers in the industry to be able to ensure that we're not paying for or using data that is invalid. And so we can, again, I suppose somebody could create a list of those kind of companies that are like Trust Metrics, Double Verify, et cetera, DAV, to be able to do that. But the reality is there's not just one set of, IBM may use one set of companies to be able to do that. Boots on the ground, somebody just asked. I'm going to answer it because even though we're not in the question and answer section, I'll just answer it because I see it in front of me. I'm just saying that there are human beings who actually are in this space. They're either in the web analytics space or something, and they're running reports that are able to help them identify when the traffic, let's say, to a web page is not using human behavior, for example. So, they're staying too long, they're coming too frequently. It just isn't human behavior. And they set up a bunch of parameters and they set those parameters, and then they say, okay, going forward, any IP address, any URL that comes to our website or comes to our advertising that meets this criteria is not likely to be valid traffic or natural human, let's say, behavior. And therefore, if it's advertising, we're not going to pay for it. If it's, in analytics, web analytics, we're not going to count it in our counts because it doesn't make any sense that they would come 14 times in one day or whatever the case may be. I'm using exaggerations for the sake of this discussion, but the reality is there are human beings who look at this stuff, at least in our company, who determine like, this doesn't make any logical sense why a human would do this. And therefore we're going to put this this URL or this IP address on a list. And it's going to help us determine and not either, like I said, pay for an advertisement that comes from that, or use that in our web analytics, which helps make our business decisions. And so what we're basically saying is there's people behind some of this. There is technology and data resources as well that we utilize, but the boots on the ground reference is the people who actually see the stuff and say, this isn't right. And we need to make sure that we're not paying or counting this stuff in our decision-making process.
I think that's super valuable way to think about it. And maybe I'll add, perspective as a sort of company fighting on the front lines. of this battle, I think there are three ways in which invalid, fake traffic, whatever you want to call it, can be mitigated. I think two of those ways are really only possible with deep technology or a cybersecurity vendor who is an expert on that, and I'll touch on them briefly. But I think one of those methods, which I think Kim touched on as well, is doable even before you deploy a vendor. I'll start maybe with the former, and I'll say that basically you have bot detection, you have user validation, and you have behavioral analysis. These are typically today the three means by which we can say this human is valid or this user, is valid or invalid. By bot detection, we mean client-side and server-side techniques, which would be deployed by a web application firewall, a bot mitigation tool, et cetera, et cetera. And these are like HTTP techniques, DNS techniques, stun techniques, TCP techniques. A TCP technique is something that looks into the back end of your system and looks for discrepancies between the data you declare to have and the data in your browser. So things which are very, I think, sophisticated and require deep technology and expertise to do that. And that's one method. The other method would be a user validation. And user validation usually happens with, Kim, you mentioned putting tags on a page with some form of, let's say, like a JavaScript tag that can challenge a visitor's browser. Again, this also requires some form of deeper technology to do this. But what we mean by that is that when a user comes to the page, to the website, and we see that their browser is telling us that they're on, let's say, iOS 10, okay? So they're using an iPhone. Then a challenge or a series of challenges sent to that user's browser to say, are you really on an iOS 10? And based on the response of the browser, the automatic response, we can tell. We know that an iOS 10 device should be typically respond with an error to this challenge, but it didn't respond with an error, red flag. And if enough red flags are accumulated with these browser JavaScript challenges, then we can say, you know, this user may or may not be invalid. That's the second method deployed today. And again, something that typically would be done by an expert vendor or cybersecurity company. But the third method, which is user behavior, I think this is where companies can get proactive about it, even before going, you know, full-blown hiring a vendor and deploying a full strategy. And I think the two areas where you can perform behavior analysis are at the user level and at the network level. At the user level, I mean, and Kim gave some great examples of this, is the user engaging and interacting in a way that is indicative of human behavior? Scrolling patterns, browsing patterns. Scrolling patterns, for example, you could use a heat mapping tool like Hotjar. We would show you in our platform what a bot mouse movement looks like. There is no bot mouse movement. There is a click here and there's a click there. There's no fluid mouse movement. So these are things that you can right away see a bot or some types of bots with a simple heat mapping tool, okay? So look for that. Look for things in your data like abnormal time on page, or a user who is browsing an excessive amount of pages in a very short amount of time, weird bounce rates, conversion rates that don't make sense. Amy mentioned a spike in traffic from a certain geo, which resulted in 0 conversions. That's what we call network level, not user level, but network level behavior. When we see some sort of spike that doesn't result in the usual things. So it could be the landing page is set up poorly, or there's a problem with HubSpot, but very likely it is invalid activity. So I think these are the two things that just through your own existing tools and data, and maybe deploying some more tools like a heat mapping tool, you can already fight fraud without even a fully deployed vendor. Amy, any thoughts on this matter?
Well, yeah, a lot of the times what I've noticed in the affiliate space and the lead generation space is the IP. The IP seems difficult to fake. So we've like seen all these IP patterns, you know, and that was one of the things that at least like in the rudimentary stage years and years ago, IP was the one thing that they maybe couldn't get right or, fix itself. But that was how we determined and found like loads and loads of bot traffic and, that were all congruent to each other or one ring of people, so on and so forth. I have to agree with your 3 call outs of the types of fraud, bot, and behavioral, and you're also right on the network level versus, versus you as the advertiser or you as the publisher. I think everybody, advertisers, publishers, and networks all have their own onus to do the best they can to fix this problem, but if one of those 3 people, usually in the mix, sometimes it's just advertiser and publisher, but lots of times there's a network or an agency involved. If those 3 people, one of them falls down on the job, I mean, it affects everybody else, So I think in vetting the people that you're working with at any level, that has to be one of the questions, like what are you doing to be proactive in this situation? I mean, I'm talking about advertiser, publisher, agency, network, and what is the recourse if you fall down on your job? And we found something, even after, in some cases, we've paid out on that, So I have to say this, we have a government, right? We have Congress and Senate, and we have FTC and FTC chairman, and I'm not all for like huge amounts of regulation, but they could sure be more helpful in this situation. You know what I mean? If you're scared that you're going to get in trouble for something, people tend not to do it as much. But here, there's absolutely no fear. Some of it is because it's a lot of people outside the country doing this. Don't get me wrong. I mean, the long arm of the law is, you can only do so much outside the country. But for people that are doing it in the United States, they have no fear. And that's why it continues and continues and continues. And I would hope that the FTC or Congress or someone at that level would put a stop to this. I mean, we know that they've had, laws have come up with Ticketmaster bots, right? We've all seen that, right? And we all watch every time we try and get tickets, let's be honest, the bots get them first, even though there's legislation passed on it. It doesn't look like the implementation of the legislation is really working because it's still very difficult to get tickets, But I just feel like our government could step in at a certain level and just lay down the gauntlet and punish these people, But I don't know if, as the government is that in depth and understanding, of what exactly is happening here. They probably are like us and have no idea why it's happening, things like that. So, but I think the government is definitely partially to blame for letting this run as rampant as it has, frankly.
I think that's definitely a very, very big, interesting, borderline philosophical topic that we as an industry need to address. And I think at this point, coming closer to the end of the webinar, we can start maybe formally, I know we've informally already done that, answering some Q&A. I'm seeing some very high-level questions, seeing very pragmatic questions about steps people can take. And I think this is where we can just step right in. So Amy or Kim, if there's any questions you've seen that have stood out, feel free.
There's one that I'm not best suited to answer coming from a giant company like IBM, but there is one that says, any tools or tips for startups that are being drowned by bigger competitors who are using click fraud as a tactic to take us down? We have a small budget and a small team. So I don't know if Amy or Daniel, you have any advice for this. It's an anonymous attendee.
Being drawn by bigger competitors who are using. yeah, I mean, that's exactly what I was talking about. You know, there are people, unfortunately, that accept this and that will take, you know, take your business because they accept this, which I think is completely unacceptable. I mean, whoever the client is, you should alert them to that and then ask them to do an A/B test on your data or traffic, whatever you're talking about, and then show them like with whether it's Google Analytics or I don't know if it's e-commerce or if it's lead generation. I mean, there's trusted formed lead generation, Journaya with lead generation or affiliates, or, you know, there's lots of other things. I don't know what type of traffic you're talking about, but I've never had any problem straight up telling the advertiser, look, these people are doing fraud to your offer, A/B test me. And I bet you that I will do better because I'm sending real eyeballs and real people with actual credit cards to buy your product to your site, and other people are not. So I think that's actually a great way to open up the communication with these people, with the advertiser, and say something. I mean, no one likes to like blame the competitor or, you know, be a rat, but like in this case, it's ridiculous. And long term, the client is going to be affected by it.
Yeah, I think maybe if I could answer that question too cautiously, because CHEQ is a vendor in the space, so I don't want to be, saying which exact tools. I have a bit of a vested interest here, but maybe it could be helpful in giving a quick mapping out of the space, because it is not intuitively clear from when I speak to all the marketers who does what and who can help with what part. I think, traditionally the space of, what was initially known as, ad fraud years back was handled by a set of vendors, the ad verification vendors they were called. They did other things, not just ad fraud, right? So they did brand safety and they did viewability, and ad fraud was one of those media quality metrics that they were looking at. And they were sort of focused on the programmatic space, and you would usually use their services through, you could, wrap your tags, you could go through use it through a big DSP maybe. There's all sorts of ways to use it, but it was in that programmatic infrastructure. And in that world of protecting your programmatic media from bots, you have Kim mentioned Double Verify, and there's Integral Ad Science, and there's other vendors in that space. So that's like one portion of that. If we're looking more broadly at the go-to-market space, right, we're saying, okay, there's the programmatic advertising, but as someone asked here, there's also PPC advertising from, walled gardens. And there's, of course, direct and organic website traffic, which has nothing to do, some of it might originate somewhere from programmatic, but we're talking about organic and direct here. And we're talking about then the downstream effect of that on, how it impacts the data, how it infiltrates my CRM. These are things outside of that world. So I think that's where, WeCheq are active as a company. And I could name a few other vendors, namely maybe people here would know Human Security, what used to be known as White Ops. I believe have solutions in the space, and then there's other companies who are actually coming, I guess, similar to CHEQ, are coming from the cybersecurity direction, not the marketing direction, and these would be companies like maybe a Perimeter X would be a good example, right, of a company that's more from the bot mitigation world, but then they provide those marketing go-to-market oriented solutions. So I think that's kind of the way to look at it without calling out who's a better or worse vendor. I think everyone's doing important, noble work to fight the fake web.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. And I've been trying not to call out specific vendors, even though that does seem like the ask here, because, again, I recognize there's, differences between the companies, but there's also, our needs are different. Our shared interest is one thing, but how a company or one company versus another can can fulfill that need for us, it will vary. And I don't want to call out specific companies as better than the other. I will say IBM for at least 7, 8, 9 years since I was in the media and advertising space has been actively, we had great leadership that understood this space and was actively looking for companies and capabilities within those companies to help us to ensure that we were not spending money. As a B2B, we don't have the same money as a B2C, just frankly, we don't. And therefore, it was very important to us to not spend money on things that were fake or not going to convert. And so we did test a lot of capabilities with our existing and also the competing vendors in that space over the years to understand what worked, what didn't, et cetera. I remember looking at literally log file data, at some point to say, this is definitely like fraudulent or invalid, and what are we going to do about it, when none of the other solutions were providing that kind of insight. So over the years, we've definitely been able to do that. So to the person, it says it's Ben. I'm going to just read this comment out for the group. I'm with you, Amy. Big budget advertisers. I'll put IBM in that space, even though there's plenty bigger spenders than us. Need to take more responsibility in actively combating click fraud. A lot of advertisers just eat the fraud and move on out of ignorance or convenience. No time to go backwards and get the money back. We never approached it that way, ever. That's just not IBM's nature. It's not our culture to do that. We take responsibility for every penny we spend in market. And and I say that wholeheartedly, like knowing the team of people who is responsible for this, and knowing that at the heart of everything that they do and everything we did, I was once a part of that team, but now I'm not. But everything they did and continue to do is trying to raise this for everyone's sake, not just ours, but for everyone's sake, to ensure that we can try to combat this as an industry. And we would like to set ourselves in ways that we can. We can't always, but in ways that we can, as not the biggest spender in the industry. We do try to set the pace, or clear the road, or make it clear that this is happening, and try to adjust industry standards. Especially this is around media and advertising more so than some of the other industries, because again, that's the biggest area where there's rampant fraud, it's seemingly, and there's the biggest gain to be had, because, if you put yourself in the middle of, pennies on the dollar eyeballs going to and from, then there's money to be made every single moment of every single day. And so we put a ton of emphasis, at least at IBM, on the media and advertising fraud, but we don't discredit it or discard it or not pay attention to it in some of the other areas. So that's just
I think it's also a form of embarrassment. You know what I mean? Right? Like they don't know how to handle it, and they're embarrassed by that. So they don't want to talk about it or confront, whether it's a network or agency or publisher. Like there definitely is a modicum of embarrassment that I've seen, it's like, well, you let this go on for 4 months and you finally say something, and it's like someone's writing it in the comments. It's a taboo topic that like nobody wants to talk about or take responsibility for, both externally and internally, and inside people's businesses.
Absolutely. Actually, we see an interesting comment that I think is worth highlighting here from Dylan, saying that they've been curating a list of blocks for over a year, blocking outdated browsers, headless Chrome, I'm assuming browsers, I'm assuming like a Selenium or something like that. Linux users, which is a good practice, by the way. I'm highlighting this because I think it's a good comment, not because I have too much to contribute to it. Linux users, I'll tell you something, when we challenge a browser saying that it's on a certain operating system, and then we find out that that is not true, and that oftentimes it's on a Linux, because that is the marquee of a large scale botnet, is that it would run on a operating system that has the computing power to do that. So I definitely, just to not to dive too deep into that, I definitely think that is another great tip for people, is to think about what are those things that you do not want. It can be a list of, which you can procure externally, by the way. You can procure a list of data centers which are known to drive fraudulent traffic, probably botnets. These are available for purchase. To be frank, not all of these lists are of good quality. Not all of them are updated frequently enough and are IP based. But even something like curating a smart and maintaining a smart list of data centers with high levels of fraud to be blocked can have a material effect on your traffic. So I think definitely block list and outdated browsers and other kind of things which are not indicative of good quality or human traffic is a great way to go before deploying an actual vendor. Cool. Anything else? I know that we're nearing the end of our time. Is there any final question, thought, comment, Kim, Amy, that we've missed, or do you think that we're ready to wrap it up?
Let me go off. Sorry, I just had to come off mute. So, so for Craig, who asked what DAV was and found disabled veterans programs. Sorry about that. It is digital ad verification. So please feel free to send, Hillary or Max additional questions. Apparently, if you need to follow up on what that means, but it's digital ad verification, not disabled veterans.
Yeah.
All right.
And
thank
so
you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone, for taking your time, for joining today. I think, it's a vast topic. It touches on all aspects of the marketing, advertising, go-to-market operation. I hope we were able to provide you not just with a description and scope of the problem and the strategy, but also with strategies and tactics to use this. And feel free to reach out to any one of us, find us on LinkedIn, send follow-up questions to Max and Hillary, and we'd love to answer any more questions about this never-ending topic. And above all, I'd like to thank again Kim, Amy, for taking your precious time to take part in this discussion, and of course Max and Hillary for organizing.
Thanks, Max and Hillary. Yeah, no, this was a great discussion and one that should be an ongoing discussion as things evolve.